Steve Bowers welcoming you to Dialogue here at E+ TV6, a special opportunity to talk to Dr. William Butler, who's one of the founders of our city. Doctor, it's good to see you.
Thank you, sir. I'm glad to have for you to have me.
Yes, sir. Glad to have you here. Well, I want to go back in you were born where?
Carlisle, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
My grandfather had immigrated from Ireland. He was a gunsmith in Carlisle, which was the Army barracks on the edge of the western frontier. And I was born there just a few years after the American Revolution.
Okay. Now, your parents had some means, I take it, because you went to medical school in Pennsylvania.
Yes, sir. Actually, that wasn't a result of my parents sending me to medical school. That came a little later in my story.
All right.
My father and his four brothers were all officers in the Continental Army. And they became quite well known as the five fighting butlers of Pennsylvania. President General Washington at the time, at the end of the Battle of Yorktown, stood up and offered a toast to the five fighting Butler brothers.
Oh, wow. Okay. So that was your father?
My father and his four brothers. Mm-hmm. And the oldest brother, Uncle Richard, rose to be the second highest ranking officer in the United States military before being killed in battle.
So you got to medical school how then, or made that decision to go to medical school?
I was in my young teens when I was orphaned. My mother had already died. My father died of malaria while in New Orleans.
Okay. Now, your mother came from what family then?
She was a Simple was my mother's family.
She was from Philadelphia? Or?
She was from Pennsylvania as well, and had immigrated. My grandparents had come together, married already.
Okay.
Three of the sons were born in Ireland.
Okay.
And then my mother was from Pennsylvania as well. But when I was orphaned, I was sent to live with my father's closest friends. I knew them as Uncle Jackson and Aunt Rachel. Most of you would have recognized them as General Andrew Jackson.
Oh, okay.
And it was through the Jacksons that I was sent first to Transylvania University in Kentucky and then on to medical school in Pennsylvania.
All right, so when did you first meet the Jacksons?
Father had been sent here when I was just a very young boy. I was only 4 or 5 years old. And he was sent here by President Washington to East Tennessee to remove white settlers who were illegally living on Cherokee Indian lands. And in so doing, some of those settlers were removed by force. And Senator Jackson was quite upset with Father's work. And so he was rather irate at my father, but he also came to respect him. And they soon became the closest of friends. Wow. So I was a small boy when they met, and I was in my young teens then when my father passed away, and I went to live with Uncle Jackson.
All right, so you came to Tennessee to live with him?
I was already living in Tennessee at the time, yes.
Okay.
We were living in the Nashville area at the time already when my father passed away.
Okay. So you became part of the military?
Yes, I served under Uncle Jackson or General Jackson in both the Creek Indian War and then at the Battle of New Orleans, where I was a surgeon under General Jackson at the Battle of New Orleans. There were so many butlers in the U.S. Army at New Orleans, my brothers, my uncles, my cousins. I did hear one soldier say that he couldn't turn around without tripping over a butler. My older brother, Robert, was the aide-de-camp to General Jackson, his second in command at the Battle of New Orleans.
So you knew him closely?
Oh, yes.
Very, very much, okay. So did you then settle in Middle Tennessee when you became an adult?
I was living in Murfreesboro practicing law, or practicing medicine, excuse me. And when West Tennessee came open for legal settlement, when it was purchased from the Chickasaw Indians, I was one of several land speculators who came to West Tennessee to investigate the area. I had first come here in 1819 before it was allowable for whites to be settling here.
Okay, you came here to scout it out?
Just to basically scout out the area.
Okay. So you knew I guess the treaty had been signed?
Yes.
Okay.
But it had not been opened for settlement at that point.
But you were looking west then already?
Correct.
Okay. So what was your impression?
Well, one of the places that my partners, Mr. McNary, Mr. Phillips, Mr. Talbot, and others, one of the places that we looked at, that we helped draw up the plans for, that we helped create, was the community that came to be known as Memphis. But I determined early on that that was not the healthiest climate. And it was coming into the central part of West Tennessee that I found the soil was better, the timber was better, the fresh water was better. Oh. And so in bringing 2 years later, my family, when we came in by flatboat, we came up the what's now called your Fork of Deer River. It was the Okina, as the Chickasaws called it. And we decided to settle in what a few months later became Madison County.
So you had explored this area then before you ever came here to settle? So
yes,
you knew what you were looking for, knew where you were going?
Yes.
So were you on horseback? I mean, how was that?
No, we were traveling by a flatboat on the river.
Okay.
The Chickasaws had owned this area, but they didn't live in the area. So there were virtually no trails, obviously no roads.
Say, yeah,
so any of the early travel had to be done on the rivers, by water.
Wow.
There were no paths and roads to travel at that point.
Interesting. This area was prone to flood, is it, as far as the
Yes,
Indians were concerned?
because of the rivers, the Hatchie, the Obion, the Fork of Deer.
So they didn't live here, they hunted here.
That's correct. There had been very few people living in this area at the time that the treaty was signed.
So the timber would have been native, wildlife would have been prevalent?
Oh, the timber was enormous. Hardwood trees as thick as you could count. The wildlife was extremely prevalent. Wildcats, bears, wolves. I can remember when Patsy and I built our cabin here that we had to tell our children not to go far from the cabin because there were so many wild animals still in the immediate area.
Okay. So you were here in 1818 before it opens for settlement, or 1819?
1819.
1819. Treaty was signed 1819. So, and you were still practicing medicine and all living in Middle Tennessee?
I was at that point, yes.
Still in Murfreesboro?
Correct.
Okay. So you've decided to make the jump?
I decided to make the move. Patsy and I moved, and I might add, in addition to Uncle Jackson being my adopted uncle, he was the uncle by birth to my wife, Patsy. Okay. Aunt Rachel was my wife, Patsy's aunt.
Okay.
So she knew them as Aunt Rachel and Uncle Jackson by birth. I was only by, you might say, by foster care.
Okay.
And we had 2 children when we came here, my son William Orman and my daughter Mary Jane.
Okay. Now you were practicing medicine. You decided to give that up, and you know what you're getting into.
Correct.
This is wide open.
Correct. I never practiced medicine once I arrived in Jackson.
Why was that?
I suppose I was just tired of the medical field, and I was doing fairly well as a land speculator.
Because you had some property in Memphis.
Correct.
Okay.
I had quite a bit of property all over West Tennessee.
Okay. Some advantages of being connected, I guess?
Correct. And I'm sure that some of my financial backing came from my uncle in Nashville and then later in Washington, D.C. So, yes, sir, I think you'll find my name listed in most of the counties of West Tennessee as having at one point been a landowner.
Dr. William Butler is with us. We'll continue this conversation, one of the founders of Jackson. We'll continue this conversation in just a moment right here on E+ TV.
Hey, let's check out this park. Oh, wow, that's really cool.
To find a great local park or forest near you, go to discovertheforest.org.
Eyes forward. Don't drive distracted.
Welcome back to Dialogue at E+ TV6 and a conversation with Dr. William Butler. He was one of the founders of Jackson, Tennessee. It's a special opportunity to have him with us. So you're in Murfreesboro, you're practicing medicine, you decide, okay, you know this land, you know where you want to head, so you convince your wife, take 2 children, and whom else comes in with you?
Most of the early settlers brought slaves with them.
Okay.
I couldn't push that flatboat up the Forkadere all by myself.
So you're in the Nashville area, so you get on the Cumberland River?
Correct, and then we would have floated
to so you can float
to the Mississippi, in the Obion, and then up.
But then when you come this way, you got to start pushing upstream.
Correct. It was a little bigger stream than it is now, I'm sure, but still you're going upstream. What you did was you had a long pole and you stood on the boat and you pushed against the bottom of the river. And then as you moved a few feet, you moved your pole and you pushed a little further.
So you're bringing with you not only wife and child and people that are helping you, then are you bringing furniture or are you bringing
We would have brought
livestock?
everything we owned, basically, that we were moving, and then we built a cabin once we got here.
Okay. So you land in this area when then?
1821, in the spring of 1821.
All right. So the county's just being organized.
It had not been organized at that point yet.
Okay, wow. But you knew that was coming.
We knew that was coming. It came just a few months later.
So you get off at the Forkadere out west of Jackson.
Well, actually south of Jackson.
South of Jackson,
yes,
okay.
was where we came in.
Okay.
We built our cabin, was in the neighborhood of where your current day police station sits now.
All right.
And the main reason for that area was that there was a clear freshwater spring that I believe is still there today.
Okay. So you
in
had
your
access
artesian wells.
Wells, that's right. So you had access to that water.
And that was a key factor in where you chose to live, was
so
you had to have fresh water.
Had to have fresh water, so you picked that up there. So how much acreage do you have when you get here?
I had 640 acres.
Was that a land grant?
That was a land grant, yes, which is 1 square mile.
Okay.
So I filed for a grant of 640 acres, all of which would have been in what then became Madison County.
All right. And so your land is what became, or a good portion of your land became, not out of the 600 acres, only a few acres, but where Jackson is today was your land.
Correct. 30 acres of my land grant I donated for the location of the county seat.
Because we did have some settlers east of here.
There were when I arrived, the Shannon brothers.
Okay.
Were the only other ones in the immediate area.
Okay.
Now, there were a few other settlers in what became the county. There was already a community at Cotton Grove, Spring Creek, Mount Pinson.
Okay, so there were people
Denmark.
coming in here.
There were some settlers in what became the county.
They were all settling along creeks as well, I guess.
Correct, because that was the only means of travel.
Okay.
So those communities had very little connection with each other because there were no roads.
Okay.
But as far as in the area of what is today Jackson, Tennessee, the Shannon brothers were the only neighbors that I had when I first arrived.
The Alexanders were where then? They were
a little further west of town,
okay.
Near the community that you call Westover today.
Okay. So how did Jackson become the site then, or the choice for being the...
Well, when they formed the county, they needed a choice for a county seat, and although there were already communities such as Denmark and Spring Creek, they wanted one closer to the center of the county for the location of the courthouse. So they were looking at areas in that area, and I offered to donate 30 acres of my land claim for the location of that. And then Thomas Shannon sold them his part of it.
Okay.
He got $10 an acre for his. I donated mine for what is today downtown Jackson, Tennessee.
All right, so who organized in the sale of the property? Once you set this
Town
up?
commissioners were named.
Okay.
The commissioners laid the town out into lots. They laid out streets. They chartered what would be streets. And then they arranged for an auction sale to sell the town lots. I did, as part of the arrangement to give the 30 acres, I got first choice on the purchase of what I considered the 2 choice lots
And they
in
were
downtown
where?
Jackson. One was at the corner of what's now Main Street and Liberty Street. I believe your Fox Cafe used to sit on that corner.
Stand there, okay. That was your lot?
That was my lot, and then the other lot was a block farther south, also on Liberty Street.
Liberty Street, okay. So Now, you said you were living in a cabin.
We had a cabin. We later built a much finer home a little further up the road. In fact, there were some people who said that Royal Street got its name because I lived like royalty on that road.
Okay,
I'll leave that to you, sir, to determine if that's a true story or not. Yes.
So you owned all the land then south and west or east of downtown?
The land that the 30 acres that I donated for downtown was bordered by Market Street, that today you call Highland.
All right. Okay.
On the north, it was bordered by College Street. On the south, it was bordered by what's today Chester Street. And on the east, it was bordered by Cumberland Street.
All right.
So virtually
everything
half
downtown
of your today downtown Jackson
was yours. Then the rest of your land went where?
Went farther to the west and to the south.
South, okay. All right, through what we call
Or to the east, excuse me, and to the
Fairgrounds
south.
Park and all there south.
That's
then.
correct.
Okay, all right, so there, all right. So
I also own quite a bit of land in the Cotton Grove area as well.
So you divide this up, you sell lots. How do people start building then? What draws people to Jackson?
What drew people to Jackson initially, I suppose, was the chance for good, cheap, farmable land for space to spread out. The soil quality here, the timber quality here were excellent. And the chance to move on and continue to move west, continue to, the Scots-Irish who settled this area seemed to always be on the move.
All right. So you got this town, and how long before you start getting buildings? And does that happen pretty much
within days?
Okay.
The town was formed in 1822. By 1823, we had 2 schools, a courthouse, and a newspaper up and running.
Okay. So it happens pretty quickly.
It happened very quickly.
How quickly did Jackson grow then? How much did it grow?
I think it was by about 1830, the population had reached 675. Now, there were several thousand in the county.
Right, so, yeah, because all around here, I mean,
you had the other communities.
Thriving communities.
And when you figure that comes to a rate of about 3 people per day coming into this county over those first 10 to 20 years.
I guess so much different now because Jackson is Madison County in many ways. I mean, it's a significant percentage of the population.
Right.
But in those days,
it was a very small
rival communities
area.
all around.
It was a very
right?
small area.
Okay. And very rural.
And very rural. When you got just within a few hundred yards from the courthouse, you were at the edge of the woods.
And so all that, even the courthouse area had to be cleared. Everything got to be cleared.
Correct. There was no clearing here at the time we decided to put a town in this spot.
Okay.
And I might add, initially, they wanted the town to be called Alexandria. Yeah. But that was part of my arrangement with the land, is that I felt that Jackson was a much more suitable name than Alexandria. So I requested that it be named after the hero of New Orleans.
Okay, and that was, and it turned out there was already an Alexandria, right?
There was a Jackson at that point.
Okay.
There was a planned community in Bedford County to be named Jackson.
Jackson, okay.
So we weren't going to be able to use that name. But I suppose that community fell through.
Okay.
They changed the name of it, I believe, to Port Royal. It never happened. And so that made the name Jackson available, and then we changed our name to Jackson. So this community was actually called Alexandria for a period of just a few weeks.
Okay. Dr. William Butler is with us. He was one of the founders of Jackson, Tennessee, maybe the key founder of Jackson, Tennessee. We'll continue this conversation in just a moment. Dialogue here at D+ TV 6.
What this place needs is better graduation rates.
What this place needs is less childhood obesity.
What this place needs is free help with taxes.
What this place needs is healthy breakfast.
What this place needs is fitness programs for kids.
What this place needs is early readers.
What this place needs is mentors for teens.
What this place needs is people to join us. What this place needs is you. To donate or volunteer, go to unitedway.org.
I don't remember how it started.
Go to that.
Our back and forth. It always came back.
Dad!
You probably don't remember what you told me.
That was perfect.
But I heard every word.
So, I'm kind of new here, but I've noticed a trend. My human does this funny thing where she goes around and gets all my toys, and then she hides them in that basket by the door. But it's always the same basket, and it's always in the same place. And then she acts so surprised when I find them, but, she's putting them in the same basket. Again. It's like, hello? That's where you put it last time. You were the worst at hide and go seek.
Welcome back to Dialogue at E+ TV 6 as we continue our conversation with Dr. William Butler, one of the founders of Jackson, Tennessee. So by the 1830s, you got hundreds of people living here.
Correct.
A lot of other communities in this county, and many things are having to continue to expand. There's interest in railroading and everything else, and you were a part of all of that
I was
discussion.
a part of all of that. Now, the interest in the railroads did start in the 1830s. Not everyone wanted the railroads. So it was quite a battle. It was actually the late 1850s before the first railroads came into Jackson. There was a stagecoach line as early as 1829 running from Nashville to Memphis that came by way of Jackson.
Okay.
You could catch the stagecoach in Jackson and for $11 and a day and a half travel, go all the way from Jackson to either Memphis or Nashville. Can you imagine only a day and a half? From Jackson to Memphis.
Okay.
It was an amazing thing.
Amazing thing how that had opened up. So we had roads being developed.
We were beginning to develop roads.
Okay, so get to Memphis. Memphis, you can go anywhere, I guess. Right. How long did the rivers continue to be important for this city as far as supply, with the Hatchie and the others?
Until the railroads arrived, I suppose.
In the 1850s, okay.
In the 1850s. The Hatchie was particularly important for the Denmark community. Steamboats could come in on the Hatchie River.
So you had merchants here getting...
So we had merchants. Most of the goods were probably brought in from places such as Louisville and Cincinnati because they were coming in by river.
Okay, wow.
On steamboats.
Now you did well here. Was it land investment and other things?
I did quite well here, thank you, sir.
Yeah, okay. You built the biggest house in this city.
Yes, sir. It was fairly common knowledge that I was the most affluent man in Jackson. Mm-hmm. And if anyone didn't know it, I was more than happy to tell them that.
Okay, let them know. And so your house became a showplace here.
It did become quite a showplace.
So your house is where you said that
you have, I believe it's a
tire store there.
A shop for carriage wheels now. I suppose you would call it an automobile tire shop.
Okay, all right.
And next door to me was the home built by my brother-in-law, Colonel Robert Chester.
Okay. So y'all had the choice spots in town, had your own racetrack.
Correct. My horse racing track sat where your fire hall is now at the corner of Royal Street and Chester Street.
Now, General Jackson, President Jackson, he visited here a few times. Were you responsible for those visits?
Partly. Of course, Aunt Rachel, in addition to my wife, Patsy, Colonel Chester's wife, Elizabeth, was Patsy's sister.
Okay.
Their two brothers were Stokely D. Hayes and Samuel Jackson Hayes, who were two more of the founders of the town of Jackson. Okay. So 4 of the founding fathers of this town were directly related to Andrew and Rachel Jackson. So they had numerous reasons to visit here. I won't take all of the credit, but a large part of it.
Okay, well, and so they had plenty of nieces or whatever.
They had plenty of nieces, and Aunt Rachel's sister Jane did live here until her death.
All right. Now, you had carpet in your home. I mean, you had things that people just didn't have.
We had imported wallpaper in our home. It was a log home, but we imported wallpaper. We had carpets on the floors, beautiful furnishings, much nicer than any of the other homes in town.
Did you bring any of that with you when you came by flatboat, or did you buy?
No, we had all that brought in later.
Came in later, okay. All right, so you
the necessities only are what came in on that initial flatboat.
All right. To what do you attribute then the growth of Jackson?
The central location, the accessibility, the fact that it was near the Natchez Trace, which led to the south. I think the fresh water was a great draw, and the richness of the soil, the timber, everything about West Tennessee appealed to people wanting to move to the western frontier.
Okay. You lived long enough to see the Civil War.
Unfortunately, yes, sir, I did.
So what was that transition like? Because people were going to lose a lot of their money and things, right?
People did lose a lot of their money. People lost a lot of their family members. People lost a lot of their friends. It was by far the worst time in our nation's history. I don't think that anyone today can imagine what that war was like. I was, of course, much too old to serve in the war, but when I came along, I was 70 years old. My grandson did serve in the war, was wounded 3 times in the Confederate Army. And in fact, there was one occasion when he was at my home recovering from wounds, and Jackson was being occupied by Union troops. And they came into my home and took him a prisoner of war out of a sick bed. They confiscated my pistols before they did so. That was one of the smartest things they did during the entire war. But by and large, at the end of that terrible war, we as a community and as a people came back together. And we rebuilt this town because it was a shambles. It had been thoroughly destroyed by both armies, one as much as the other one. The new railroads were destroyed. We had no courthouse, we had no jail. The town had been largely burned. So we were almost starting from scratch.
What made Jackson survive then after that war and that conflict? Because a lot of people had lost their money.
By and large, the railroads.
Okay.
Because they made us a center of travel, and you could now go from New Orleans all the way to Fulton, Columbus, Cairo by rail, and those railroads came through Jackson. Okay. We had so many railroads in town that it looked like a patchwork at times, going in all directions.
Now, you'd been very instrumental in what became what we now call Union University, University of Memphis at Lambeth, right?
Yes, sir.
Even Vanderbilt University, right?
Judge Brown had more to do with Vanderbilt than I did.
Yeah.
I did have some effect on what you later called Lambeth. It was initially the Memphis Conference Female Institute. It was a ladies' school of the Methodist Church. Right. And I did donate the land where my racetrack had been for that school. And then it in later years became Lambeth University. Yes, I also was instrumental in the work of Southwestern Baptist University, which later became Union. Very little in those first 60 years or so went on of consequence in this town that I didn't have some hand in.
What are you most proud of when you look back on it?
I think I'm most proud of the way the people of this town worked together and built a community out of what had been a rugged forest when I first arrived. There were no homes, no people, no roads. And when I died, I had lived here for 60 years. We had a thriving city. We had factories, we had businesses, we had building booms going on. We were advertising for craftsmen to move to Jackson because there was so much work to be done. We had a public school system. We had a fire and police department. I think I'm proud of the people of Madison County and of the way they worked together to build this community.
Doctor, it's real good to have this opportunity to talk with you.
Thank you so much for having me today.
A special insight into our history. Many more things we could talk about, but it's a real honor to see you.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. William Butler, one of the founders of Jackson, Tennessee. We'll explore more things in our history coming up in other segments. We appreciate you being with us. Stay with us here at D+ TV6 because this is the place where the dialogue continues.